Committee on State Building Construction. We've got a big day ahead of us here and a short time to do it, so we'll go ahead and get started. Before we hear the presentation on the Docking State Office Building, we have some unfinished business. We heard the capital improvement budget requests, recommendations on February 15th. We did not have enough people in the building that day to vote on those, so we need to. They're on our agenda there, and I need to take a motion one at a time to see what the committee's pleasure is. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that we would accept the recommendations for the Department of Corrections Facilities budget.
Okay, I've got a motion seconded by Representative Humphreys. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is Department of Administration. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to make a motion we would accept the recommendations for the Department of Administration.
Senator Francisco seconds that motion. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item of on our agenda is Department of Transportation. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that we would accept the recommendation for capital improvements for the Department of Transportation.
Okay, I've got a motion seconded by Representative Humphreys. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next is Department of Children and Families. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that we would accept the recommendations for capital improvement budgets for the Department of Children and Families.
Seconded by Representative Humphreys. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Last capital improvement budget is Department of Aging, Disability Services, and State Hospitals. Recognize Representative Hauser.
Thank you one more time, Mr. Chair. This one's for the win. I'd like to make a motion we'd accept the recommendations for the capital gains of Department of Aging and Disability Services, State Hospitals.
Seconded by Senator Francisco. Is there any more discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, committee, you saw last time also on February 15th, we went over a consideration of change order for WSU. And we heard the reason and testimony for that. So again, we need to take action on that with a motion. Do I hear a motion? Representative Hauser.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we would accept consideration of the change order for WSU.
Seconded by Senator Hawk. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, committee. We've been trying to get that done for a couple of weeks. All right. I think the moment's come that we've all kind of really been waiting for several weeks, several years, maybe. Presentation of the Docking State Office Building by Secretary D'Angela Burns Wallace, Secretary of Administration. She is here in person, and we're glad to see you, Madam Secretary. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Everyone hear me? Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm glad we could join in person. And I will just say we are excited to have this conversation. Many of you have been a part of this conversation much longer than myself, but in the time that I've been here, we have been actively trying to provide information to the legislators around the Docking State Office Building. So I'm here this morning at the request of the chair to give the committee an update around the information that we prepared last year for this committee and the budget committees. When I get to the question portion, we have a host of individuals who are online that are also here that can answer questions, including our design architects, KDHE, and members of my own team. So we hope to be able to answer as many questions as we can today. But I do want to start with a short presentation, just bringing us back up to speed as to where we are and giving a few updates. Next slide, please. So this is why we're here, Docking State Office Building. And next slide. Just as a reminder, the Department of Administration was asked to put together an updated proposal information in May of 2019. We brought on Clark Huseman through a bid event who did the work, and then we delivered to this committee last January. I know it's been a while, the completed report. All of you have a copy of this. If anybody does need a hard copy this morning, let me know, just because there are some details that are easier to see in the packet. We have a few extras. Okay. With that, one of the things that you'll see in this packet, as well as the materials that were provided to you for today, is it looks very similar, but it's a thinner, about 6-page document. We asked Clark Huseman just to take a look at the materials that they had provided a year ago and to update them to say that they were still valid, right? To make sure that the assumptions that were made, cost projections, and you'll see that there are some updates in the cost projections, but just as we brought this forward, wanted to say that we did refresh it to make sure that it was up to date. Next slide. So in the original proposal, if you remember, we explored and presented to you 4 options. There were more options explored, and actually in the overall larger analysis, they actually talk about some of the other options, but these were the 4 viable options that were brought forward as part of the proposal. And they focus in 2 areas. Option A, which is the full renovation of the building, and option B, which would be a cut down version of the existing building. We would take off floors off of the building, and we would go all the way down to 3, and then we would rebuild back up 3 floors to make it about a 6-story building. So those were the 2 base options, was to renovate the full or to make a shorter building. And then we actually, as we started to do this work, we were working on docking. KDHE was working on their new lab proposals. We had 2 architect firms that were doing both. We started to see some synergies, and we actually brought them together as they were doing their analysis and asked them to explore if there was a possibility of the lab being a part of this proposal. What we came to is that it was a viable option and it was feasible. So what we then offered as the part of the final set of recommendations was the lab in either configuration. So a full building renovation with the lab, so that's option A plus lab, or the shorter building with the lab, which was option B plus lab. If you have the original proposal, under sections 4, it details each of the different plans extensively. And on page 75, if you just want to bookmark it, is the cost breakdown for each of the 4 plans in the original proposal. Just to give a reminder, one of the things about all of the proposals that is important is that the programming space, which is also under section 3 of the original proposal, included conferencing facility. Conferencing facility that would be flexible and dynamic and that could hold up to 250 people. It also included training space and additional meeting space. It included an interactive state exhibit so that we could pull in some of the historical, but also other things that could make it very much a showcase to complement the conferencing facility. It included an outdoor event space. It included shared teleconferencing space, wellness support rooms, dedicated Capitol Police parking, and many other features. So irrespective of the options A or B, with or without lab, the programming that we identified actually ran through all of those options because that was identified in the analysis as needed programming for the space. All of the options also maintain the central power plant, which is in the sub-basement, the campus maintenance operations, which is in the basement, as well as central warehousing, and again, the Capitol Police, which are currently located on the first floor. The other thing that is outlined in the original proposal are things like the efficiency study, being able to maximize energy and efficiency in a brand new building. And the one thing that we did stress as they went through the analysis, the bones of the building are good. The infrastructure of the building is good. And so because of that, next slide, please. Oh, we're there. Wait, is that, go back one, I'm sorry. Right there. So because of that, a year ago when we presented this to you, we were trying to just provide the information that was requested to be able to say what are viable options, did we understand the building and the needs. We're a year later, and the Department of Administration stands before this committee making a recommendation that we really believe, based on everything that we did in the original analysis, plus what we continue to learn over this last year, that the best recommendation would be option A with the lab in the building. I'll talk through a couple of things, and as we move to questions, I understand that you all may have different options that you're interested in, so we are prepared to answer questions across any of those, but I do want to just talk a little bit about the idea of renovating the entire building with the lab included. One of the things is that it provides needed space for state agencies. And one of the things that we face right now is many people think around, oh, we're in this COVID times, we've gone to remote work, we clearly won't need as much space going forward. There is a reality that agencies are having an opportunity to have real questions and strategic conversations about their space needs. But we were at a place before COVID that we couldn't fit into the spaces we were already in. And we are in ill-fitted spaces. We are in spaces that don't match the business needs of our state agencies. And we have state agencies who are split across multiple buildings in terms of inefficiencies. And we are all over the city, not just downtown. What docking allows us to do is to be a lot more strategic about our spacing, and it's a domino effect. What we fill docking with opens up some of our other state buildings to be reconfigured and to utilize those spaces better. It will allow us to be out of some of our leases in different places. That doesn't mean that you move out of one space and they come into docking. Space may be in Landon, space could be in Curtis, depending on what that domino and shuffle is. My goal is for us to look at this strategically and not just simply say we have 20,000 square foot right there, you're an agency who needs 20,000 square foot, we're just gonna plug and play, but that we are strategically looking at all of our properties and our spaces and using them, and docking allows us to do that. We can use this space, there is a need. Additionally, one of the things is that it does allow us to restore this historic building that is key and critical to the face of downtown. If you've seen or have heard anything about the master plans for Topeka and their downtown, like this it could be a cornerstone for them in terms of this space being renovated, bringing in a science lab and that kind of core to the area. It really is part of and plays very well in hand of being a great partner with the city and having this, both the renovated space downtown, but also having the lab in the space. Helps us with recruitment and retention, both of overall state employees, but also particularly with the lab being in the city center and being new, and the lab having a proximity to so many other functions. KDHE is a very large agency, and then they partner with a lot of other agencies. And there is a need for that proximity of being in Topeka, but being downtown also assists with a lot of the work that they do. Again, the building structure is in good conditions. With the building fully renovated, it would bring, have the ability to hold somewhere between 800 and 950 employees in the building, just to give you a sense. Plus the conferencing facility, again, that could support up to 250, but it would have different configurations. Right, next slide. This is just a breakdown, and this is in your original proposal with a lot more detail. So remembering in this particular design, the conferencing space would be on the first floor. The KDHE lab would have a small footprint on the first floor, which would have some public access as well as drop-off capabilities for their sampling. Then the whole second floor and the majority of the third floor would also be the KDHE lab. There would also be some meeting space, joint meeting space on that third floor. There's also in the design, across all of these design, a sky bridge that connects to the parking lots that are already across from docking to allow us not to have that foot traffic crossing across 10th. People could park, come up and across. They would enter the building on 3. And so there would be a public area that's on 3, but the lab would be secure in terms of another part of that third floor. So no crossing and no issues there. And then floors 4 and up would be viable office space that could be utilized. And so that just gives you, I know it's really small on that PowerPoint, but it is broken down in section 4 of the original plan where you can see that particular layout. Since all of the things that have happened with COVID, the lab has already, KDHE has already identified that based on their original kind of footprint that they were thinking about the lab, that they believe that they could use up to 15% more space than was identified in the original plan. We've taken that into consideration. It will fit fine. We had some growth room in renovating the whole building already that was built in there. And the cost adjustments that you see, or that I'm going to show in a second, around the new cost adjustments, take that into consideration. I will note one thing, and KDHE can speak to this directly. When we talk about the KDHE lab and being able to put it in docking, we are building the infrastructure, the shell. They still do have certain costs that would be specific to equipment and certain outfitting, as you can imagine, and they have estimates, and that was in their original proposal. So it's not all of the pieces, but it is the full shell ready to go where they can plug and play into the space that is available. Next slide, please. This is just a picture, and this is also in the original of the outdoor plan. And I just want to point out a few things here quickly. Patio event space, which could, I really think, again, as we talk about the conferencing space, outdoor patio event space, think about how that lays out to the Capitol, being able to use the lawn, that south lawn, as well as kind of rolling over into docking. Additionally, there is dedicated Capitol Police parking, which would be very helpful given that they have facilities on that first floor. There is also the loading dock, which is still available, but there would be a carved out service drop-off area. As you can see, that's at that back corner, which would be where KDHE would have their drop-off and specimens in that thing. That does not take away our existing loading dock and the ability to bring things in through the loading dock that is separate. So just wanted to point those out. Next slide. Cost projections. So again, in the original proposal, on page 75, you have the original cost projections for the 4 options that we provided. It is full renovation plus lab, the shorter 6-story building, and then the 6-story building plus lab. And if you go all the way to the bottom, you can see the total cost projections. What I've provided you here on this slide and what is in the updated packet from Clark Huseman is that we asked them just to look at the A+ lab, just to give you a comparison. We can run all 4 scenarios for the committee. It's not a problem. We can do that very quickly. We were just trying to show just what has happened just in the 1 year in terms of the cost. As you can see, the first column is the updated cost. It's come down by about $4 million, and well, it's come about 2.5 overall with the total projected cost. One of the things that as we've looked at it, right now, there are lower interest rates than last year. There are the construction market is a little bit softer. There's interest and need for, construction jobs. And so at this time, some of those costs have come down. And so the other things that we've provided in your packet is that you should have the revised estimated bond projections, and those have come down in comparison to a year ago. We ran those just to give you a sample as we did last year. Again, bond rates are really good. The state refinanced a number 13 different bond series this year and made a long-term saving for the state. We could take advantage of that now as well with those lower bond rates if we were to bond this amount. So that is just a sample so that you all can see what that could look like based on current rates. Next slide. Just want to say a few things as I begin to wrap up. The project plan for this project is 36 months, and that is kind of a start to move in. I don't know, I think that's may not be the right technical terms, but that's how I think of it. And so understanding that first phase, we still have to do schematic design, design development, and construction design to be able to get it out the door for RFP for construction bid. The demolition and abatement, many of you do know that there needs to be abatement in the building, are all rolled into one to save costs, but it would be in the early phases to move that through. Again, the bones are good, and then we're in very much being able to take advantage of the existing structure and to gain the necessary efficiencies. With that, I believe, one more slide. Okay, yes. So I would, just to let the committee know, I have with me project consultant teams, the Clark Huseman team, Steve Clark and Jane Huseman are with us. They were the architectural design firm that helped do this large study that you received last year. We also have Chris Ertel and James Beecher, who were from Clark Enerson, who did the KDHE study, and they were doing them in parallel as we were doing the docking one. And again, we had them confer. And we also have engineering Bill Bassett, who has extensive experience with docking in particular, and I believe maybe also the lab. Also with us this morning, and all of these individuals I believe are online, is Deputy Secretary of the Environment from KDHE, Leo Henning, and the Director of the Labs, Myron Gonzalez. Both of them can speak directly to questions in and around the lab. And with me, I have online my Deputy Director, actually with me, my Deputy Director of Maintenance and Construction, Dale Moman, and Design, Construction, and Compliance Architect, Bobby Pearson, and can try to answer questions from our side in relationship to buildings and space and that history. So with that, sir, we will stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. I know some senators have to be out of here at 8:30, and I want to give them a first chance. And I do see Senator Clay's hand up. So, Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Burns-Wallace, for all the work that your agency has done on this project. It's been a long time coming. Can you give me some background on the pricing should the KDHE lab not be included? Would that be the same, and then the lab is an additional amount of money, or does your pricing also include the labs being placed inside there?
So if we take the full renovation model, just as the example, if we were to fully renovate docking without the lab, the projections last year were $114 million for docking full renovation. And then I believe the estimates on a standalone KDHE lab were around $58 million. And so that would be if you did the two separately. Based on last year's projections, we can update those, of course. The cost that we are projecting for the renovation of docking plus the lab come in at 152.
Okay.
152.9, yeah. So 153 million.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might continue before I have to go,
Go ahead.
When you're analyzing this, I understand the advantage to combining the two, because we do save some money if that's, you know, the goal is to just save some money and shoehorn this in there. But I'm also a little bit concerned about putting the labs in there, because the advantage to having agencies next door to the Capitol is that they have access to the Capitol when we're in session. And a lab doesn't really create an advantage simply having a lab in there. My preference, and I'll just state it now because I'm sure we'll have a discussion later, would be to have a standalone lab and address that issue, and then have as many agency HQs as possible next door to the Capitol within close proximity, because that is the advantage to having a building right next door, is to have those agencies accessible to the Capitol building. But I'd like to get your thoughts behind that and the rationale there, just so we have that clear before we go into deliberating on this. And then I'll mute myself. I appreciate it. And again, thank you, Secretary Burns Wallace.
No problem. So what I would say is that, yes, there's a bit of a cost savings there, but it's not just about the cost. What we've looked at is also the efficiencies that are gained from the lab having proximity, and the KDHE team can speak a little bit more to some of the efficiencies that they gain. The other thing is that having labs in urban cores have other benefits that were researched and a part of the original proposal that was also part of the consideration. And I do understand in about the proximity to the Capitol. The one thing that I can say is the full restoration of docking, even including the lab, will allow us to increase the number of departments and agencies that are in the Capitol complex, with the domino effect that happens with the other buildings and some of the spaces that could open up. So we do still get a little bit of that gain. It's not a one-to-one, of course, as you can imagine, because there will be a footprint of the lab, but I think that there's a combination of both. And it also gives us an opportunity for recruitment and retention a little bit differently, of having that lab in the urban core, of being able to leverage that against other projects and initiatives as well. I don't know if there's a member from the KDHE team that wants to speak a little bit more to that.
Yes, Secretary Burns Wallace, Chairman. This is Myron Gonzalez, the Director of the Labs. Can you hear me okay then?
You're a little muffled.
Okay. I'll speak up a little bit then. Nobody's ever accused me of not being able to hear me. Thank you all for letting me visit with you a little bit this morning. I would just add to the Secretary's comments that there is an urgency also to having the lab, and having the lab in the docking does provide a very good connectivity to the number of programs and the number of agencies that we actually serve as the the official state public health and environmental laboratories. The other thing that is critical, and again, Secretary spoke to this, is that there is a very strong benefit in being in the downtown area for retention and recruitment. You know, I think I've mentioned to this committee or members of before that there really is no, you know, if you're when you're trying to recruit young graduates and senior scientists and professionals, being inside a downtown area, or being in a place where there's good housing, good restaurants, good shopping, things like that, you know, things that you find in a downtown area, is really critical. You know, professionals expect to be able to see that. And so we do see the desperate need for this, and also an urgency for the lab to have a resolution. I'll just leave it. We are in a place where there's a desperate need, and we see that docking is a good path forward in that regard.
Senator Clays, does that help with your question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that it differentiates enough from having a standalone lab in the downtown, but it certainly speaks to the rationale. So I appreciate that.
Okay, other questions? I guess I would have a question. When we look at this, And I have looked at the new bond schedule. It quotes a 20-year schedule and a 30-year schedule, I believe, at what I assume are today's bond rates. What I don't have in front of us as a committee, and we did a couple years ago, and I've misplaced it, is a schedule of leases around town and how much we're paying on leases. Because we have to consider rebuilding docking and moving people out of leased properties into docking also saves us money. And so I think the committee or the legislature as a whole needs something to look at that gives us an idea about how much money we're spending on leases. So that'd be a question I have. Questions, Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming in person. We so appreciate that when people are willing to do that. Okay, I have a few questions if that's okay. Okay, my first one is a tiny question. What's grab and go?
Sorry, it's it's food.
Okay, food. Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Okay,
Sorry.
thanks.
We know that we need food in the building. It's an
Yes.
important piece.
Okay. Okay. Then, so I'm sort of like I like to put things in context, the big picture. What I don't understand is, yes, we're spread out all over. Like, okay, for instance, the insurance department, are they going to be willing to, they just moved, are they going to be willing to come back and move to a building like this? I mean, I'm thinking what I hear you saying is you want the ones who have moved. We have a bunch downtown, but also around Topeka. Are they going to be willing to come? So who do you envision as filling up that building?
So what I would say is it's a combination, and the insurance department might be a little bit different, right? But I'll give you an executive branch example. The Office of Information Technology Services, which happens to be one of my other hats, is out at the State Defense Building. OITS services all of the state agencies. My team has to move back and forth and move equipment back and forth out at that. And at the time that that decision was made, it was made for various reasons. But that is a full state agency that needs a footprint that could come back downtown. They would not necessarily go into docking, but as say parts of KDHE that work with the lab go into docking, and other agencies that are better fitted to go into docking, that could open up space, say in Landon or Eisenhower, for then that agency to move back down. So it is, there's I would say we've probably run 20 different scenarios of a combination. And some of them are state-owned state buildings where we would be shuffling, and others are leases that may be coming up to expire over the next few years that could be aligned in such a way to capitalize on bringing people back into state office buildings. So we have run numerous scenarios about who fits where and then what those dominoes look like. And we can share some of those, but a lot of it has to do with it's a continuous strategic conversation that we're looking at. Does that help?
Yes, exactly. And just, I know it's more minor, but keep in mind that's also cost. Just moving everyone around, that's an ongoing cost that we would have as a state also. Okay, so then you mentioned, yes, people are going to be more virtual. Maybe we don't need as much office space, but I didn't feel like you really addressed, I mean, you said it at the beginning, but I do have a concern that maybe there's not going to need as much office space. And I mean, I know we're in a hurry, so I'm just going to say my next question too at the same time. How does it help Topeka when, like, I don't know if you're talking about DCF, that's a huge building, and I don't know if there's room over in docking for that. But for instance, that building, how does that help Topeka to have that be an empty building or another building that we are leasing? I'm assuming now one's leased, but I don't know. How does that help downtown Topeka for the state to move out of Kansas Avenue?
So the first was on the need for office space. So let me clarify. While offices are thinking smarter and understanding how best to utilize their space, we still will have a significant state footprint of employees. Under this COVID time, many agencies were able to move into remote work, but it is not our optimal or it is not our most efficient. So we are coming back.
Good.
But
Yay.
please understand that. And I say that every day to state agencies, we are coming back. But we've learned a lot about what space needs to be and what the spaces need to look like and how do we space differently. So we are going to be taking all of that into consideration. And so our footprints may not look exactly the same, but I can tell you that when we did our space analysis over a year ago, when we surveyed all of the agencies at that time, cabinet, non-cabinet, across the board, 27% of them at that point in time said that they were too big for the space they were already in, right? So we were already pushing on those parameters, and we learned a lot more. So we still need the space. To your second question, it's an interesting thing. One of the things is, and we've talked a lot with our partners here in Topeka, with the downtown Topeka group in particular, the amount of usable office space that we would be putting onto the market and the way that we have talked about it, particularly with the lab in there, is not untilting the market, or it's not flooding the market, and it's not, and they have expressed that they believe that it's a good thing, because we're not saying we're gonna run out of Kansas Avenue and empty all of those buildings, well, because we still need some of those leases. So that's the other thing of making sure we're being clear, like we're not gonna drop every lease we have in every direction, because some of our buildings make sense for the functionality of that agency, and we need to stay in some of those lease buildings. But there are other properties that it makes sense for us to move back in and working in partnership. If you look at the Topeka project, they have a master plan that literally goes around our Capitol complex. And the more we know and the sooner we make decisions, it helps them to be able to incorporate of how to use other spaces that could be vacated as they're looking at their larger, because they're bringing in housing and retail and other things. So we're trying to be good partners, and they have been a great partner in saying we would be excited to see the building renovated, that the full building, particularly with the lab and the amount of square footage that it would put into that, the market of square footage, would not hurt based on what we have talked with them.
Okay, and just if I may, just one last thing. I just want to go back to what Senator Clay said about the lab, that well, I will say when I hear the, it attracts the urban, the urban setting. There's positives about it, and it was restaurants, which I do think we have some good restaurants. Housing, we don't have a lot of housing right around here, and I don't know if you're thinking that's going to attract housing, but being someone who looks for housing every year, it's not I don't know that that's going to attract that young urbanite to having the lab there. And I do think there might be a different place that might be better. So that's just a kind of a social concern, but I also have the same thought as Senator Clay's, that I haven't seen demonstrated the benefit of having the lab right next to the Capitol versus still being somewhere, but letting it be a standalone or a new, you said 58 million, the lab alone. So just so you kind of know that I would be coming from a similar position to him, I think, from what I've heard so far.
What I will do is I'll make sure that we reach out to our colleagues with the city of Topeka to share their master plan, because the housing piece is a big part of their master plan. That's why we're doing, like, it's a partnership, right? Mm-hmm. And our timelines actually line up very nicely in those spaces, and that's part of what we are looking at. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of weigh in, and I guess government work is always interesting in terms of we're really good at being able to make urgent decisions, and put them off. And I applaud you and the administration of trying to get us to get to a decision. And there's always the illusion that we will find the perfect plan. And there probably isn't a perfect plan. So I want to weigh in. I hope we could get to a decision. And I think the sooner we could get to a good decision that we could all live with, the more a lot of the pieces you're talking about would fall into place. And as having been a former agency head and gone through the shuffle of having an agency on Kansas Avenue and then being moved into Eisenhower and resisting that. And then actually when I got there, I went, wow, this is actually a better space for us as a state agency. And it was nice being connected up with KDOT and some of the other agencies there. Plus the cafeteria was right across the hall. But that's kind of the human side of it. And I think my staff was actually pleased when we moved, but not happy initially as people get used to their spaces. I have some concerns about the standalone lab, and I wondered if you might talk a little bit about what are the advantages if we move the lab into docking. I would assume we're going to move some of the KDHE agency spaces that are spread out in other places there too. Mm-hmm. What are the pros or cons to that?
So I'll address some, and then I'll also, if Myron wants to address them as well. From an overall state perspective, if I'm looking at space and efficiencies, it is that we get to bring some of those KDHE entities a little bit closer. They are all over the region. They're not just in one space, and they gain a certain level of efficiency. The one thing about, please remember, we have a building and we have a shell, and it is going to cost us a certain amount of dollars to maintain that building. Creating a new building creates additional cost in relationship to maintaining that building, everything from the energy, the maintenance, all of the things associated with that. And I don't know that I have a specific number there, but I can get you one. But understand that a separate building has to have everything that it can stand alone and all of the services associated with that standalone space, right? Our capital complex, and when the way that we structure and set up the capital complex, it's all encompassing for an agency, right? And so their utilities are in there, their maintenance is in there, anything in relationship to, it's like it's a one-stop shop for how we service and maintain an existing capital complex building. And so from a Department of Administration side, and we think about the efficiencies, our dollars best spent, the fact that we have a building that has that shell that is good, and we believe that this need and both of our needs in terms of more space as well as a new lab could be met with an existing construction versus any additional new build. From our standpoint, those would be the benefits. I don't know if there are others that might be from more of a technical lab standpoint, or my architects, if they want to weigh in terms of what they looked at when they were looking at that as part of the proposal. The screen.
Secretary and Chairman and Senator Hawks, I just make a couple of quick comments, and then if the architects want to weigh in, that would be fine. Myron Gunn-Sales, Director of Labs. I agree with Secretary Burns-Wallace because, and as a small example of the efficiencies of being in a state building that houses others, is security alone. We currently have to employ an outside security agent to cover our responsibilities for 24/7 security. If we were in docking, we would not have to add that to our, we would not have to keep maintaining that. Whereas if we're in a standalone building, we would have to maintain that. And that's a fairly, in the grand scheme of things, perhaps not the largest, huge cost, but it's just kind of, it's an example of the efficiency of being within a building that already exists. I think that was just to make a note on that from the lab side.
Representative Alcala.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Secretary. Thank you very much for presenting. I just want to make a quick statement. I may answer some of the questions. The state capitol sits in the 57th district that I represent. Been an elected official for 25 years, and through local government. Downtown Topeka, I heard some questions come up, good questions. I want to talk briefly about housing. From the 1000 block to the 600 block on North Kansas Avenue, we have loft apartments sit on top of candy stores, spice stores, sandwich stores, restaurants, full. We get down to the third, the 4th and 300 block of North Kansas Avenue. They built brand new buildings. Well, they revamped brand new buildings inside old warehouses, waiting list. If any of you ever been to Cars and Cigars or Cars and Cigars that John Frederico puts on, that area to the east of there, lofts, waiting list. So young people are coming into the downtown area and staying, and those rents are anywhere between $1,100 to $2,000 a month. They're full. The other thing is the city of Topeka has paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state on the Pope Quincy Viaduct project, which is between the 300 block of Kansas and the 600 block of Kansas. And they're going through there with a whole revamping of businesses, relocations of some businesses. So downtown Topeka, and this is the Downtown Topeka Chamber, the partnership, Go Topeka, which utilizes sales tax, which is, I don't know how many millions of dollars a year, I couldn't tell you. But these buildings and these developments on North Kansas, they're thriving. They're not even in the beginning stages, they're in the middle stages. So I think when they talk about housing, they're talking about that area. I know that they've looked at some areas to the west of this capital, going in and getting into some of those neighborhoods and redeveloping them. And I would tell you that with the lab inside the docking building, I think we have a lot of other state agencies also that can fit in there. I can't think of the name of the building now on 10th and Quincy, which is east of North Kansas Avenue. I think it's part of the revenue department that's in there. I'm not sure, Madam Secretary, you might be able to help me. But if you go in that building, they're bulging. It seems like there's just too many people in that building, and they came from docking. And so I remember during the Graves administration, Bill Graves, Governor Graves, wanted to have one-stop shopping in downtown Topeka in the Capitol Plaza area, and that's where we're sitting at right now, Capitol Plaza Authority area. And so that's when he relocated, motor vehicles, everything else down here. It worked out great, and people were real happy with it. When we got in the Brownback administration, they started separating and sending those agencies out, 10, 15, 20 minutes from downtown Topeka. Made it an inconvenience to get there, but you had to get there because you needed a driver's license, or you might have needed something else in documentation. So I would think that the revitalizing of the docking building is a good idea. I think putting state agencies back in there is a good idea. I know that we don't want to buy anybody out of their lease, because I did see that list a year ago, and it was a tremendous cost. But a lot of those leases are coming up right now, and so I think that putting people back into that docking building is going to be more dollar-wise smart for us to make that decision versus leaving them separated out all over the place. I just want to add to that, and Madam Secretary, if you have anything you want to add to those comments, I'd appreciate it. But there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that the city of Topeka is investing in downtown Topeka. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was very pleased that the Ag Committee got all their work done yesterday, and I could stay for this discussion. So two issues. One, we haven't heard much about the basement, the sub-basement, and why docking, or those floors of docking, are going to stay no matter what we do. So it's not like we can walk away from that. And I see
that is correct.
Head nodding. I think one of my questions about the KDHE labs is not just what connections they have with the Capitol, but what connections they have throughout the state. People are dropping off specimens and things to be tested. There's connections. How important is their connection throughout the state? Where are most of those tests coming from? Obviously, we know that the most populous area of the state is this northeast quadrant, because they need to interact with us, but really we're service to the citizens of Kansas. So how do we see that as important to be in Topeka?
So I'll quickly address the basement, sub-basement, and then I actually am going to ask Myron to address the second part. So again, in the original proposal, the basement, sub-basement, remembering the entire power plant that fuels the entire Capitol complex is in the sub-basement. We took a few of you on our tour through it yesterday, and if anybody else wants one, let us know. Perfect. And so it will stand. We have kept those up to date as best we can along the way. So they're not in dire straits or repair, because that power plant is essential for our functioning, no matter what was happening above ground. So, but there are still some improvements that, given the fact that we would be doing the renovation, were included in the original proposal to update a few more things. I think one or two of the chillers were included to be able to upgrade it up to continue to hold the load, things of that nature. So there were some updates to that sub-basement and basement level that are included across all of the plans, just so that you're aware. And there are some energy efficiencies that come with this, the renovation of the building, that others might be able to speak to a little bit more if there's interest there. But I would like to turn to Myron, if you want to speak to the second half of Senator Francisco's question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Senator Francisco, the Chairman. Yes, we do serve the entire state of Kansas, and many of our samples come to us either via mail, via contracted couriers, or some of our environmental samples that our programs take will be delivered by hand from those program staff directly. Many of those staff are here in downtown Topeka already at the PERS building, so that is supporting us. So it's a very important one. I really thank you for actually just making note of the fact that our lab does. I mean, we recognize that every citizen in the state of Kansas is basically our lab's customer. And I kind of come from a commercial background, so to me, it's all about customers and making sure we serve the needs of the customers. So, and that is true. But many of them are by courier, by mail, and by program staff.
Okay, committee, let me say one thing. I know some of the representatives have to go at 9 o'clock for, I believe, appropriations maybe. So I want to I think our meeting can continue, but I want to give those leaving at 9 o'clock a chance to make statements about something, maybe an option they're thinking about, or anything before they leave today. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I hear the word lab, I'm thinking Ebola, blah, blah, blah. So I know we probably talked about this last year. And it's been a year and I forgot. So
okay,
could you please tell us what kind of level of contagions you might be dealing with in the docking?
So, Myron, can you talk about the contagion level? And one of the things I will say that was outlined in the study is we did specifically look at all of the necessary safety measures for the lab to be co-located in a building and to be in an urban core. And we outlined the procedures that would be necessary and felt from both sides of the architectural firms that it was viable. But Myron, do you want to speak to the levels that are in that lab?
Yes, ma'am. We do maintain a biosafety level 3 laboratory. That is our security laboratory that supports things like the FBI and our civil support team when they have an incident where there has some serious potential biological threat. But I would echo, so that's the kind of things we do have if we need them. If we need the ability to evaluate pathogens or contagions, we have it. We would be building this lab. It would even be a very strong protection. Our containment, all of the systems would be self-contained and or vented properly and filtered properly. And we have evaluated the vast majority of our work is public drinking water or common things that are in any main hospital laboratory. So there's dozens of them around every urban area already. So.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the follow-up. My hope would be that we would leave the high-level contagions to the CDC and the new lab up in Manhattan.
And
Chairman?
go ahead.
Just one other comment. We actually work for the CDC with the high-level contagions, and one of the benefits of having our biosecurity laboratory in Topeka is if there were an incident in Manhattan, we would be able to support them with the same level of containment that they would have there. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Our meeting will continue and be accessible, I'm sure, archived later. Also, committee, I want to tell you that there's tentatively a tour of KDHE planned March 15th. And I would caution you, Myron, that best made plans like that can change, as we've seen. We have no idea what the schedule is on the House floor yet, things of that nature. So, but tentatively, we do have a tour scheduled March 15th, and we can find out a lot more. So with that, we'll go ahead and continue. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now that there's just 4 of us in the room, I'm not sure I can really gauge the temperature of the committee, but the big conversation here today seems to be about, the in-docking lab or the remote lab. And I was just curious, is option A or option B, have there been previous discussions that I've been out of? Is anybody in favor of option B?
Not that I'm aware of. We've had discussions in recent years about that, but, we've run out of time today as a committee, but we'd love to hear anybody's.
I don't see a benefit to it, and from the conversation today, I'm gathering nobody else does neither. But I didn't want to make that assumption, so I thought I'd just ask the question.
With which part? The lab?
The A or B.
Okay. Yeah. Senator Hawk.
Thank you. And in answer to part of your question that you didn't ask, I think we had some other options besides A and B. And I'm trying to remember what we called them. If there were a couple options for remote labs at other locations, one out at Forbes, one at K&I think. And I think there was even one, and I'm not sure if it was in the parking lot.
It was, sir.
So, and I know in a conversation that I had with some folks in Manhattan a long time ago, there was an option about whether all of our labs ought to be located to Manhattan. And the Department of Ag lab is in Manhattan. And of course we have NBATH and VR3. So there are some other options. There were some other options over the last decade that have been looked at.
Go ahead.
Didn't KBI just recently build a new lab right down the road here? And okay.
What I will say is there are a few options. Some of those earlier options that were explored are outlined in the original proposal. When this particular one came forward, I think the architectural teams felt that these were probably the 2 most viable, given the history and the cost and where we were and what the needs assessments were for space. Last year, when we presented this, KDHE, when we did our original rollout, KDHE actually presented with us. We presented this, and then they presented their work that also showed, as Senator Hawk mentioned, 3 possible standalone sites, and those were, but I will note that all 3 of those standalone sites were in Topeka, and so what they had put out there were for still this lab to stay in Topeka. And I don't know if, Myron, you want to speak to that importance of when you all did your work, if it was to be a standalone, that you still only identified Topeka locations.
Yes, ma'am, and that is a critical piece. You know, even though, as we mentioned before, we serve all Kansans, all of the service to them relates to programs that are located here in Topeka. So many of our customers, many of our the regulatory components of our customers are all here local in the downtown area, and that was the reason we stayed here. We did, as Senator Hawk kind of alluded to, there was several years ago a discussion and even a sort of a preliminary study to try to consolidate some laboratories into Manhattan. It became evident that it just was, for one thing, in that particular case, it was not financially feasible. And it was also, there are some major losses that we feel we would have in a move to Manhattan. One of them would be that ability to support the containment if there were some incident near the NDAPS facility. Us being in Topeka allows us to support that better. One of the biggest things is the cost of living and the recruitment and retention. While there is a university there that you would think would be helping with recruitment, you'd also then be competing with federal jobs, which are generally a little more lucrative than the state jobs. So we would always be basically training new graduates until they got enough experience to be hired by the feds right there in the same town. So we do see that a move to Manhattan is a less desirable option for our agency.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you. There was some discussion, about that we were not just talking about KDHE labs, but we were also talking about other parts of the agency that would be co-located. If the labs were to move, how does that break up that ability to work with those others, or what are the important connections between the labs and other parts of the agency?
And I'll speak a little bit to that, and then Myron might be able to add. And so we wouldn't be able to gain that same level of efficiency because the structure of the standalone lab would be just that. It would basically just be picking up the lab functions that they have now, of course, updating them, and then building a new facility. So the way that it is structured now, you wouldn't be able to get the efficiencies that we're talking about bringing more of those KDHE labs or those KDHE partner departments into a co-located facility. So we would still have some of the inefficiencies that we have now, and we wouldn't have that gain. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question that has kind of occurred to me, and maybe the architects want to speak to that, or Myron. And I don't know that I have a big concern with this, but I'm just looking at, if we put that lab in docking, and since the last time we talked about that, you reported that we had a need for 15% more space. So there's been some change. I could see 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, some of the technology that we use in the lab may change, where we would need a different kind of space or more space. If we're limited by the footprint of docking and the actual space that we have there where docking is located, what are the pros and cons or the disadvantages to a standalone lab at one of those other 3 sites we looked at in Topeka? I could see potentially some advantage. One of the sites, I remember, there was some energy efficiency with the way the building was going to be designed and some solar advantages, et cetera. But potentially, if you needed to add on to that building, you could do that. I would see you couldn't potentially add on to docking. So what do the architects think about the trade-off on that limitation of locating in that confined space at docking versus some other space where there might be an opportunity as technology changes? Long way to answer a simple question, sorry.
And I'll turn to them, but one of the things that I would have us consider is you build a standalone building, it also has a footprint, and there would be a cost to be able to expand that footprint. Docking has a larger footprint, and we do at times repurpose various pieces of our state office buildings, right? So you have a larger footprint that you can work with, even though it may not initially be designated as part of the lab. The one thing that I would note is take Landon right now. We are emptying out a data center. Those two levels of Landon, there's 2 floors in Landon, I think it's 7 and 8, that were designed and constructed a certain way for a data center. Our data center has been there for years. We are moving out of that data center, and we will be converting that space into something very different. More long-term, that still could happen in the construction of docking. There's also a percentage, and I apologize, I don't know it off the top of my head. When you do a renovation, there's also a percentage of growth that you put into the plans, and I know that that was incorporated. But if someone from either of the architectural firms would like to speak to that more.
Yeah, perhaps this is Chris Ertl with Clark and Dennerson. Perhaps I can speak to that as the lab design architect. The proposed KDHE laboratory in docking building has been designed on what we call a laboratory planning module. And this module affords the flexibility to adapt over time as testing methods change. The current KDHE lab was shoehorned in an old existing hospital with very minor renovations to that. And the lab spaces do not accommodate the flexibility needed to expand easily. What we are providing is that opportunity with the casework systems, the electrical and plumbing infrastructure to be able to provide that flexibility that KDHE laboratory needs to operate efficiently and effectively as things change in the future. And we would provide that in any building, new or renovated.
A follow-up question. I know I've toured NBATH and Roberts Hall at K-State, and there certainly are some very, in terms of pathogen containment, there certainly are some very sophisticated doors and locks and negative air ventilation systems, et cetera. And then I don't think we're going to probably be bringing large carcasses in for testing at this lab, but certainly at K-State they have some very unique ways to dispose of those lab specimens. And so when I guess I'm looking for reassurance, and you've given me largely reassurance, but as we look at that, I think it would be much more difficult to repurpose floors 4 through 11 to do lab things. If yes, you could repurpose. If we build that lab in those first 2 or 3 floors, I can see how they could be built with the right kind of ventilation and all of those. And I'm not an architect, you can tell easily, but you could have the flexibility within those floors. I think it would be very expensive, if potentially impossible, to repurpose other floors for more lab space. Am I seeing that right, or is there something in the horizon that would make that easier to do?
So you are correct, Senator Hawk. Again, the building floor-to-floor heights and docking as you get into the tower are significantly less than what they are in the proposed location of option A. We do have flex space on the second floor with health section offices that we could expand to and move those offices to an upper floor as expansion was warranted within the docking building. So we do have that flexibility, in addition to providing KDHE laboratory some additional flex lab space based on recent events.
Committee, any more questions before we surmise this meeting.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The one thing that I would just want to say to this committee is that I know a lot of our conversation has been around the KDHE lab. We see both the needs for a resolution with docking as well as with the KDHE lab. There's immediate needs for the state with both, and are really looking for a resolution for both. The Department of Administration is making the recommendation for the full renovation plus lab, just based on our analysis, everything that we know, the strategic posturing that we are working with in terms of our space. But understanding that there are other options out there, but what we are just asking is really encouraging the committee to, think about a resolution for both of these areas, whatever that might look like. And as always, Department of Administration stands ready to execute on that directive when it is given. So we state that because I don't want to lose, the conversation of there's docking and there's a lab need. We believe this could fill both in a way that helps the state, is a strategic move for the state, is financially viable, and gives us other things that are not as quantifiable as just dollars, but at the same time, they are both two issues that we hope we can get resolution on, whatever that looks like during this session. Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Hawk.
I'm sorry, I probably should have mentioned this. I want to be clear about one thing, and I think I am clear about it. From Ways and Means, and I don't know if on the House side in terms of appropriations, but looking at the governor's budget, that I think it was it $1.6 million, maybe it was only, for the renovation of docking was in the budget, and that was pulled out of the governor's recommendation. And so my initial interpretation of that, without talking to anybody, was, okay, the governor's backing off of that. But further pursuit of that said, no, the governor was being very clear that the legislature needs to be part of that decision making. So just to punctuate what you just said, the administration is making a recommendation, and they would like to get a decision and move forward on this. And the fact that the governor didn't put that money in the budget is not an indication that she nor the administration is not supportive of getting a decision on docking. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir. We put it in our line item with an attempt to ensure that the conversation was happening and that we could move forward. But we did put it in with this particular recommendation. And so the governor said that it needed to be broader and more collaborative, and we weren't trying to force it through, but just to make sure that there was a placeholder. The dollars that were proposed in our budget is really for like the schematic design. It was all the early things that needed to be done to get us ready for that construction. Between this fiscal and next fiscal, it's about close to 10 million just to do the schematic design, the construction development, all of that to get us ready for bid. And that can start at any time when we're ready, but we do have to we need to know which option we're moving forward with so that early work can start so that we can get ready for that bid construction.
And so my takeaway on that is if we can get to a decision, this committee has some recommending to do in terms of the budget as well as appropriations on the House side and Ways and Means. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you. I'll try to sneak in one last question. Senator Clays had said the proximity to the State House was important for department headquarters. Are you pretty confident that there would still be space to get department headquarters within proximity to the State House and the lab on site in the docking building?
We are.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, committee, in agreeing with Senator Hawk, the goals of this committee to come up with a recommendation to both Ways and Means and Appropriation. We've lost our quorum today. That's not going to be possible today. I would urge all committee members to be thinking about this issue, and I know they have after this presentation today, and we will try to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. And I would hope this committee could come up with a recommendation of some sort. And so the one thing that I feel is, at least my perception personally is, I don't think we can talk about docking without at least talking about KDHE. Having toured that facility, it's outdated, it's not functional. We need to do something with KDHE. I'm not sure if this committee agrees it needs to be in the docking building, but nevertheless, something needs to be done with KDHE, at least in my opinion. And so I don't think we can talk, I guess we could talk about docking without KDHE, but it's my hope that, as the secretary indicated, this committee comes out of here with a recommendation for both docking and KDHE, whatever that looks like. So, seeing no more questions, I want to make sure that everyone involved, looks like Senators Hawk, Humphreys, and Owsley have tentative plans to tour KDHE. And so I think that's a good idea. I have been there recently. So tentatively, our next meeting will be March 15th at noon in this room. And at that meeting, we'll consider change order of more than $125,000 for the Adjutant General's Department. And that same day, an hour before meeting here at 11, they'll conduct that tour of KDHE. So, seeing no more business for the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.